Welcome to the SAAS Operators, 3 CEOs from some of the fastest growing software brands, and me, trying to get as much information out of them as possible. We have Rashab, co-founder of Format, Jeremiah, the founder of No and Stamped.io, and Zach Murray, the founder of Foreplay. I think this is the only conversation about how to solve thousands of go-to-market problems at the click of a button. This isn't about how to sell more of the Blueberry Belly Blaster 2000, more t-shirts or cosmetics. It's about how to build the engine to support, upgrade, and accelerate the best businesses, whether that's a direct-to-consumer product like, I don't know, Ozempic popcorn, or apps, maybe a dating app for, I don't know, French ballroom dancers. I'm excited, guys. Automation is exciting. AI is exciting. D2C brands, political candidates, pharmaceutical companies, teams at businesses of all shapes and sizes are frothing at the mouth for more AI. So let's get started.
Jeremiah made a tweet pretty much saying, I think some podcasts came out, like the Finance Operators Podcast, and I think you quote tweeted it being like, "Oh, what you guys really want is the SaaS operator." So we're in a stream of everybody copying each other and then just strapping on whatever business you have and then operators. But I think before we actually started recording, you had some like really interesting like insights about like the positioning of like businesses in our category and the customers that we sell to. I think it'd be cool if you can like open the curtain a bit and be like, oh, this is why I think that this sort of podcast is valuable.
Yeah, I think so. It's, a little bit humorous to be like, hey, what y'all really want is the SaaS Operators Podcast. And I think it's, it's like, I what I'm hoping for here is that we can have a little bit of like a tell-all sort of approach, right? Where it's like, hey, if we can really, to your point, Zach, like pull back the curtain a little bit, show you all what actually goes on. Like for us, we are at the end of the day business owners and operators who are trying to do the same thing as the customers we serve. And so this is an interesting world where, we're B2B and we're serving brands for the most part that are B2C, right? And so the B2C world is different and from the B2B world, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, which is that we care about things like profit margins and we care about things like or should maybe not profit when you got a VC money to spend, but ultimately someday profit, right? And we care about unit economics, and we care about the way that we build teams and caring for our customers and doing a good job of that, customer support and service and all that, right? So we have all of the same core problems in our businesses. And I think what's really interesting is, my hope is that we can actually kind of dive into some of that and explain a little bit of like why things happen the way that they do. And this is not fair to say of everybody, but I do think there's a bit of a sentiment of like, hey, SaaS is just out to get you if you're a business owner. And that certainly is not what I'm trying to do. And I don't know, I don't want to speak for everybody here, but I'm going to assume that we're not just out there trying to get everybody, right? Like that's not the goal. The goal is to actually like help your business, grow your business.
I hate interrupting, but I want to just add one thing. It's like that serves no one because it just reduces our TAM. Like if you think of us as pure capitalists, like the best thing we can do is expand our TAM, not contract it. So, like you don't have to trust anything other than capitalism to believe that. So.
Yeah, if you suck every business dry, you have no customers.
That's actually an interesting segue, like into the approach of building software, which I think there are like two very different routes, and I think the approaches about like how you grow them and how you go to market are very different of bootstrapping versus like raising VC. I'm like a steadfast bootstrapper for like I would say more emotional reasons than logic reasons. Like I read a book before I started Foreplay. I had like sold an e-commerce brand that I was running, and it wasn't like an outcome that I wanted. And I read a book that I think the title was just called Optionality. And the whole premise of the book is like you only make decisions that give you the most amount of options in the future. And I like lived my life based on this book for like 2 years. And now I've lived my life with too much optionality to where now it's like really hard to make decisions. And so I think I've like swung on the optionality in like personal and business, but I'm super curious about like what was your guys' like path in terms of like building the business and funding it at the beginning, and like what decision making did you have in that piece?
I think Jeremiah, like said two things that are important. One is like eventual profitability and unit economics, which answers the VC question. So ultimately, there's only two reasons why you should raise venture capital. The first is that the unit economics of the business are strong, even though the initial profitability is weak, meaning it takes a lot of upfront capital in order to be able to build the thing, whatever that thing may be, and for whatever reason. And over time, it's like paying itself off because the unit economics, so every time you sell one of the things, it pays off that quote unquote debt that you incur by actually raising venture money. And in some ways, venture money actually literally acts like debt because it gets paid first, right? So that's one bucket. And the second bucket is that you are going to be misaligned with your investors unless you are building something that can drive a very big outcome. And that is, I think, often the actual biggest delta between Bootstrap and VC, which is like, do you legitimately believe that there is a multi-hundred million, multi-billion dollar revenue opportunity in the end state? Or do you legitimately believe that there is a multi-million dollar opportunity in terms of revenue in the end state? And both are awesome for the founder of either outcome. And so like this is like in a truly no way in judging, but you just have to decide like which one of those are you building, so that way you can actually serve everybody correctly, serve the investor correctly, serve your team correctly, serve the customer correctly. Because if you're not actually like deliberate about that decision, you're going to end up with like all sorts of perversion, right? And so I think that's actually ultimately what it is. Like I actually tried to build two businesses bootstrapped. This is 10 years ago now. So I remember like what that style of business building is like. And it is like fundamentally different than a venture type of business building. So you're way more risk on when you're venture business building because you have debt, basically.
Yeah. Did you guys have product market fit before you raised your first bit of money? Or is it raised from like day one?
We raised before we had a company. Like there was nothing incorporated. It was like literally a slide deck, or actually less than a slide deck was the first investment capital. And then the second investment capital was before $1 of revenue. And then the third investment capital was when we finally had some revenue.
What was your vision at that moment of raising without product or without it, like a company? Like what did you raise on?
Honestly, I raised on a problem statement. Like in 2020, Apple announced that you're no longer going to be able to track people from app to website. And I was working at this company called LiveRam. And sort of my pitch was, I know this space very well because I'm at LiveRamp and I understand exactly how the mechanics are going to break. And like people don't realize it yet. Like the market did not correct for it until the beginning of 22. And so you could see that people didn't realize how impactful this change was going to be in 21. And so I just like told people like, guys, like the market's going to get demolished. People are like CACs are going to skyrocket. Facebook is going to lose a ton of equity value. And then that happened. And so I raised money because the problem statement clarity was very high. I think it's so different than bootstrapping. I mean, Jeremiah is like also a lifelong bootstrapper. Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like it's, what's nice here is my experience is also a little bit different because it's, I don't even know the best way to describe it, but essentially, so No was started from the context of a marketing agency. So it was bootstrapped, but it was like having seed funding, essentially, right? So like so Pearson Crass, I think a couple of you probably know him. He and I have been friends for a long time. We go way back to when he owned a brand and I was doing work in the WooCommerce world, like, I don't even know, 10, 12 years ago. And so he owned Lunar Solar Group and we decided that we wanted to build a company from within Lunar Solar Group. So he basically funded everything out of the agency. And so we went from, they had like internally some tech that they'd kind of worked on. And so I came in and took all of that, got it ready to go to market. And we spent a year and a half essentially with the agency funding what we were building. And then we actually went out and looked at raising money. And I think what neither of us really understood at that time was the unit economics and what a VC is looking for in that context. And so I think maybe it's unfair to say Pearson didn't understand that, but I didn't understand it for sure. And so, our core plan that we were selling was $100 a month. And you go and you talk to a VC and they're like, well, that's $1,200 a year. That's never going to get to the point where this is a $1 billion company. And I remember chatting with a VC, and I mean, she was great. So this is not a negative statement, but she said like, hey, I think you guys have $100 million business here. If you never go out and raise money, I can definitely see that happening. I just don't see how you get to $1 billion. And I was like, well, that's fair. I don't either. And I didn't have like a path to that. And so ultimately, I think what I got in that process of, because we didn't like formally raise, but we put together a deck, we went out and talked to some people just to kind of gauge interest. And there was interest in what we were doing, but not at the prices we were trying to charge for it. And I had somebody else who actually, who's in this space and who you all would probably know. And he was like, dude, you should just go find 100 customers that'll pay $2,500 a month. That's more interesting to me. If you can find that, that's the type of thing you can go raise VC money on. And I was like, yeah, but that's not what I'm trying to do. Right. So, we got a lot of clarity there. And so we ended up, we were trying to think of like, okay, well, do we reorient all of this to actually go after that type of an ACV, right? Where we're charging 10K plus per year, and if not, what does that look like? And then we ended up connecting with, actually I just realized I'm wearing it, WeCommerce, which is part of Tiny now. But at the time, WeCommerce was basically a public holding company focused on e-commerce SaaS. And so I ended up connecting with them and we sold to them because we realized that like in that context, it's more of like a PE model, right? Where it's like, how do we build profitable businesses? And they're looking at the long term. And so in that model, they're like, if we can build a business to 5, 10, 20 million a year in revenue and have it operate at say a 20 to 30% profit margin, we're happy with that. That's a good outcome. And we don't care about going at it after $1 billion because we're going to buy 100 businesses and that's how we get to $1 billion. Right. And so I think it's a little bit of an in-between where it's like, we weren't fully bootstrapped, but it was a little bit more of like a bootstrap sort of outcome that we were chasing in this context where it's like, hey, if we think this is a path to 20 million a year in revenue, that's great. Like there doesn't have to be anything beyond that for this to be successful. And that, to your point, that's still a great business, right? There's nothing wrong with a business like that, but it is not a VC business. And I think like my pride when I first started hearing the term lifestyle business, really didn't like that. Because I want to build things that live beyond my involvement with them too, right? So like when I think of lifestyle business, I think of like, okay, well, this is just like a thing that like nobody really cares about, but I don't think it has to mean that. I think in that context, to be clear, I think it's a slightly derogatory way of talking about it. But I also understand what a VC is saying when they're like, hey, we want to put money into something that's going to have that path to $1 billion exit. And, the reality is 99% of businesses don't have that path.
Yeah. I always laugh at like the derogatory like lifestyle piece because I think almost like 50% of the use of that word or that statement in a derogatory sense is like at least 50% of it is like VC-backed founders kind of like coping with the fact that they can't see the white light at the end of the tunnel, and they're like, oh, like it's just a lifestyle business. It's like, okay, bro, like a couple $1 million a year in EBITDA is like pretty good lifestyle. Like, what's your lifestyle? And so, but I do think it is like, like it's like how much of that is
that's so funny.
Or like selling, I think the thing I
think you're right, by the way. I do think it's founder cope. Yeah, I see that totally, by the way.
Yeah,
I can't disagree with that.
I think like I always thought I would read these business stories of people that would have a ton of like outward success or like public facing success. And then you hear like, oh, like actually there was a crazy pref stack and they came out with like a couple $100,000 and they paid themselves $100,000 a year. And it's like, yeah, like building business is really fun. Like I really like it. But if you took all of the money out of building businesses, like I definitely wouldn't do it. Like there's some people that say that like, oh, I would do this if I made no money. It's like, I wouldn't. completely transparently, like if there wasn't an incentive to have like a better lifestyle or to leapfrog into like the next thing that I want to do, or like give me resources to do the next thing I would want to do, I wouldn't do it. Like I started Foreplay with like one like very specific small goal, and it was like I just wanted $10,000 a month of free cash flow. And it was like at the time I had an agency, and it was like maybe making, I don't know, like 50 to 75 grand a month in cash flow. And it was like, I just wanted like a little thing that I didn't need to talk to a client and get something signed for, that just like paid for some stuff in my lifestyle. And like the business now has become more than that. But I do think it's like still kind of like in our DNA, which is like, yeah, like we're building this business to like not provide resources to go on to the next thing, but like to provide some sort of outcome that I would consider positive, you know?
Oh, wait, by the way, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying that the business is, for every dollar in, producing more than a dollar out. Like that is good for the economy. Like,
Right.
that's like a totally reasonable thing. By the way, but yeah, I think that, like generally speaking, if somebody were to ask me like, hey, would you recommend to someone to bootstrap or to do the VC funding route? I really think that it's like the second you're asking that question is already the wrong question, because the problem is like you're asking an external source to tell you what to do, whereas like it's actually entirely based on your goals. Like there's no way for some external party to tell you what to do in this context, right? Like I don't know your goals. So
Does anybody have any like very specific goals that they have in regards to like what they're doing right now?
I mean, I can tell you mine. Like, and why it sort of led me down like raising capital, even before having like a product shape, basically. Like, I basically wanted to build something that had the widest possible footprint against this problem statement of you can no longer track people on the internet. And so my simple logic was, this is like the size of this problem is extremely large, and it is highly unlikely that I am actually going to meaningfully make a difference to this problem unless I raise capital. And that was it. Like that was the entirety of the motivation. And then, and this part happens to be a personal belief, which is, I think that people who raise venture money, candidly, need to have a better like next best alternative than people who bootstrap, because you have to assume it's going to, like, when you start it, you have to assume that the likelihood of failure statistically is high, even though you believe that the business is going to succeed. And so what that means is, like, for me at least, I knew I was hireable, right? Like I knew what my salary was going to be if the company failed. And so like, and I knew what my personal runway was at the time that I made the decision to do this. And so like that was part of the calculus, like very, very clearly when I was making that decision.
That's an interesting concept, like the personal runway thing. Like that's something I think about quite a bit. So I started my first startup in college, bootstrapped. Like everything I did was bootstrapped up until this kind of like hybrid bootstrap, like funded by an agency thing. And the challenge I always ran into is I didn't have any money. And so when things start to go wrong, it's just like I had to stop what I was doing and go get a job. Like that, I kept running into that problem because I had no backstop. And I think that's an interesting piece of this, because I actually think in the one potential advantage to raising VC can be that if you don't have a backstop, it at least gives you a shot at making a go of it if you are trying to tackle a bigger problem. Like there's some types of businesses you can just bootstrap, and it's like, hey, I literally don't need any cash for this, or like maybe I'm going to do it on the side of my day job or whatever that is. But you get to a certain point where if you don't have a personal runway, there has to be some sort of cash to make it happen. So like for me, a big reason why when Pearson was like, hey, do you want to do this thing? A big reason why I said yes was because I was going to get a salary, because I was not at a point in my life where I could actually afford to work without a salary. And so, yeah, I don't get a massive piece of the outcome necessarily, but I get a salary. I get to build something I love, and I get a piece of whatever happens in that context, right? And so for me, that was it's interesting because my point here, I guess, is that I think the VC can potentially give you some of that too, depending on what you're trying to build. And I think that that's an important piece of it. And then, yeah, Zach, going back to your question in terms of like my personal, like my goals and what it is that I'm trying to do. I've been in e-commerce in some capacity or another since 2012, building initially in the WooCommerce ecosystem, had a brand for a little bit, did agency work. So I've done a bunch of different things. And then I also come from a context of I grew up in a family business where my parents literally had a physical retail store. And so I've always had this like really strong interest in better understanding like who people are and why they buy. So that's a piece of the equation. And that was ultimately like the impetus for No being the thing that we built. Like this is Pearson and I both had a decade each of a decade plus of experience in this space. And there's some interesting problems that you run into where you just don't have a ton of context around like why people are buying. And you can see all the order data, right? But like it's just kind of numbers. It's not like actual like people that you feel attached to. So to me, like that's still a problem I'm trying to solve. And I think like, I mean, I'm 5 years in on that now. And I think another 5 years probably still won't be solved. And I think it's like such a massive problem. I actually do think that the potential, if you find a good solution in this, is actually $1 billion company. But I could never tell a VC how I would get there, if that makes sense. Like I didn't have a plan of like, here is the thing that I'm going to go build to go do this, because I don't even know what that thing is. I still don't fully know what that thing is, to be honest. Still working towards it, still trying to solve it. So like that problem statement, I am very passionate about. But then the other thing I will say is, for me, a thing that I really care about is learning how to manage an organization. So not just like in the past, I've built things from 0 to 1. I've done that multiple times. And so recently I took over another business that Tiny / WeCommerce own, Stamped, which is in the same space, solving a lot of the same problems as no commerce. And the big reason why I said yes to that was, one, there's some product fit. Two, there's a lot of opportunity to kind of like take the vision that I had and accelerate it more. And then the third thing though is like, and this is where personally I'm really interested in this, I get to manage 75 people now. And I wanted to know what that would be like, and to actually like get to experience that, because I think someday down the road, what I'm trying to answer for myself is like, am I a CEO or am I an entrepreneur? And I don't actually know the answer to that question yet. And that's a big piece of what I'm trying to unlock is like, which of those am I? I've been an entrepreneur for a long time. Can I actually take that next step to be a CEO? To be determined. That's my title, but we'll see how it actually plays out over time.
I'm interested. What's the distinction in your mind between an entrepreneur and a CEO?
Yeah, in my mind, it's like, okay, so and I think all of us are this way, right? Like we can look at the world and say, here's a problem. And if I don't know the solution, I feel very confident that I can go find the solution to that problem. And like, to me, that's an entrepreneur. CEO is more running an organization, right? Like how do you implement systems, teams? How do you set vision? Like for me, that's a big piece of like, how do I internally know what I'm chasing and know like the vision that I'm after? How do I actually effectively communicate that to, in this context, 75 people, but someday maybe it's 500 people. I think that's like the difference to me. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the way I kind of see it.
I think there's actually like an emotional difference between the two people. And I think you could like switch like your emotional state. Like, I think the biggest difference is that you can hire a CEO and you can't hire an entrepreneur. Like if you're a business that's like, we need an entrepreneur in our business, it's like, good luck. Like you have to just like acquire something or something, you know? And then the other piece is like, I think a CEO can look at a problem and then just the existence of the problem is like enough for them to be excited enough to like pursue it and solve it. Whereas I think an entrepreneur is like much more connected emotionally to, it's like, if they don't care that much about that problem, they actually really don't care if it gets solved all that much. Yeah. Whereas like a CEO, it's like, oh, the business needs to figure this out. Like that's enough for them to go and I think attack it with like as much, velocity as possible. Whereas an entrepreneur, if they don't care about it, they're like, I don't care about this. Like, and so I think it's almost like an emotional, I don't resonate with like the title of CEO like at all. Like it makes me like actually uncomfortable. So I have like zero desire to like become a CEO, or like, I think my biggest like fear would be like a public market CEO. Like I couldn't even imagine that.
Yeah.
Whereas like I have friends who are entrepreneurs. They're like, oh, that's my dream. And I'm like, buddy, like take it. So that's cool. Was that always like an ambition or a curiosity of becoming a CEO, or was it like a shift?
I think it's always been there for me. My parents, so when I was 6, they opened like this little health food store. So it started like this little tiny, I think it was like 1,000 square feet. And then ultimately my dad employs, I think like 60 people or something like that. And it's like a Whole Foods at this point. So it's like this gradual process. And I remember as a kid, I started working there every summer through the school year and stuff. And I was always like, man, I could do this better. I could do this better. Like this is like, I wasn't that passionate about the thing necessarily, but I was passionate about like doing this thing. And that was like a lot of arrogance, to be clear, as a 16-year-old thinking I would know better. But I think that was, if I look back, like even at that point, I had a little bit of that. And then, I remember it was in college, I watched The Social Network, the Mark Zuckerberg Facebook, it's not really documentary, but like a,
Dramatization.
Dramatization, yeah. And I watched that with a couple of friends, and I was like, man, I'm going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. And that was like my ambition at that point in time when I was 20 years old or whatever it was. And, that's obviously didn't materialize. Never. And actually, I kind of hope it never does. I don't want that necessarily. But yeah, I think like that idea of like, I want to move beyond just like solving a problem to like running an organization is something I'm always interested in. But I haven't had that opportunity. So
I think, by the way, for what little it's worth, I'm pretty sure that movie inspired like an entire generation of founders. So
on my
it's like
Spotify Wrapped, every year the most like popular playlist is the Social Network soundtrack, because I just, when I'm working, I like listen to it, and it's like, it actually is just like a really good work music. But then every once in a while you like be going through your day and you'll find a problem, and then you'd be like, oh, and then there would be like the perfect time in a song where you're like, oh, like this was actually like an amazing scene in that movie. And so like I listen to it probably like at least 3 hours a day. Is just,
dude, that's hilarious.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to check it out. I have not listened to the soundtrack, but now I'm curious.
I haven't even watched the movie. It sounds like I need to watch this movie.
It's good. It's really good. The other one that like always fires me up. Have you guys watched We Crashed? The WeWork dramatization? Oh, like amazing soundtrack. I've actually showed it to a couple other people. Like I'll like meet a girl and be like, oh, we should watch this, and they hate it. And I'm like, I think actually objectively this is really bad television, but because it's so connected to who I am as a person, I'm just like, nothing gets me more fired up than this stupid show.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I love all of those shows. The Uber show, the We Crashed one. Yeah, they're all, and they're all inspiring, basically. Like I don't walk away feeling like, wow, that was bad TV. Like I walk away feeling inspired.
Totally. Yeah. How about you, Zach? What's your what would you say your goals are?
I have this like very specific goal of $50 million liquid by 30. Because it would be like undeniable that I would then die with 100. And like the way that I got to that,
you're not counting on a very long life, but yeah.
He said undeniable.
Yeah, undeniable that I would get to 100 if I got 50 at 30. The way that I got to that was when I was like a kid, I was always just like, I want to be like a millionaire. Like that was what I said I wanted to be when I grow up. And then when I like grew up and I realized there wasn't that much money, I was like, well, I have to like I have to reframe like what my childhood belief, like what did I believe that was as a child? And then I was like, oh, if I like 100x it, I'll 100% get to whatever that feeling is that I thought it was as a child. And so I was like, oh, I'll just take my childhood goal and like multiply it by 100, and then reverse engineered from there. It's completely like not based around like lifestyle or logic. It's just like, oh, like what did that like little kid think that was? And then like, what is the reality now? And like, that's pretty much it. Like outside of like monetary goals, like I really want to like just live a radically different life throughout my entire life. I remember like when I was a kid, like I was always really enamored with, there's like a history class where someone said the word polymath, and then it like, I was like, what the heck is that? And then I was just like Googling stuff about polymaths, and I was like, wow, what a cool thing. And I was like, this doesn't seem like it's like a real thing anymore in society. But I was like, well, how could I like build my life to potentially be the closest thing to like whatever that is? And so like my goals after foreplay are like, I want to become a fine artist, and like just like check that box of just like, oh yeah, like I built a software company and I sold like a piece of art for whatever, like $10 million or something. And there's like a bunch of other like random things I would want to do. Like I when I was in grade 7, I had a math teacher tell me I wasn't good enough at math to be an architect, and like that's what I wanted to be when I was in grade 7. And so it's like, oh, like I want to also potentially just like build some sort of like one property that is like regarded as like an architectural like masterpiece and stuff. So like that's like generally like my goals is just like, well, how can I just be like the most like dynamic and interesting person to myself? And yeah, and right now I'm saving ads, so
So I think this is really interesting though, because I wonder how, because I guess wouldn't describe it in the same terms, but I feel a lot of that too, right? Like I like to play basketball. I kind of have a dream of like playing pro basketball at some point, even though I'm like mid-30s now. What could that look like for me to be in my 40s, not in the NBA, that's clearly out of reach, but Ice Cube has his 3-on-3 league. Like there's options potentially, or maybe I have to go and start my own league and pay for it. I have no idea, but like that would be kind of cool. Or I think writing a book would be cool. Like there's a bunch of different things like that I kind of want to do as well. They're like totally disconnected from the work that I do, but would be fun things to do. And I wonder like if that's I feel like that's probably a common thing among entrepreneurs. Going back to your point about entrepreneurship and the problem solving things that you're passionate about versus just solving problems. I think that is an interesting, like that may be a very common thing. I have no idea what you guys think about that, but
I think it's extremely common. Yeah,
yeah,
I think
on the
it's
sport
extremely
front,
common.
I was like, me and my friend were once like, oh, like I wonder if we could still make it to the Olympics. And it's like actually 100% possible. So like like based on like my research, my most likely chance of making it to the Olympics would be on the Canadian bobsled team. So like bobsledders peak like mid to late 30s, early 40s. And like I looked up kind of like all of like their strength benchmarks, and it's actually, there's not that much skill. It's pure like power output and speed, and like almost no skill. And so it's like a very quantifiable thing that you could like improve like at that stage of life. And so that's also like a random one where it was like, oh, if I could make the Canadian bobsled team and like just get the tracksuit, like, wow, what a cool thing to have on like framed in your living room. It's like, oh yeah, I went to the Olympics.
Dude, that's so funny. Okay, so my oldest daughter is 4. She was 3 at the last Olympics. And she said, Daddy, I want to win a gold medal with you at the Olympics. And so I immediately started looking up like, what could I do when I'm in my 50s? There's not very many options. It's like shooting and archery and stuff. But I'm like, hey, I mean, if that's what you want to do, let's go find some sport and do it together. That'd be fun.
I met an account manager at Gorgias at a dinner like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and this came up, and then she found out that she's really just like naturally good at shooting. Like she went to a gun range for the first time in her like mid 20s or late 20s, and like she was like shooting, and the people were like, you've never done this before? Like you're shooting like the top like 90 percentile. I've never shot a gun. So she's like now looking into like shooting in the Olympics, being like, oh, I could like potentially do this. Like I have like a ton of just like natural skill here.
Yeah, I love it.
That's ridiculous.
I think there's something interesting in what you were saying a second ago about the Olympics, though, versus business and solving problems. Because I don't know if you're an Olympic gold medalist shooter or Canadian bobsledder, you're not solving any problems, but you're doing something great, right? You're the best at something. So maybe there's a through line there, right? It's not solving a problem; it's being the greatest, right?
No. There's. I think the other thing that we're not saying out loud is a lot of founders, whether you're a SaaS founder or ecom, it doesn't matter. You have a chip on your shoulder, you have an ego, and you have some childhood trauma, and you put those things together, And really what you're doing is you're trying to prove a point to someone all the time. That's what's happening. That's what you're hearing. Yeah. And so, and I think it's okay to admit that out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of what's actually happening.
I think it's more valuable to admit it out loud to yourself, because like you could have this like thing inside of you that's like driving you to do a bunch of stuff. And if you're not fully acknowledging the goal, you don't have as laser of a focus. But like the fact that I'm like, oh, like my like Mr. O'Brien, my 7th grade math teacher, fuck you, I built a crazy architectural masterpiece. Like if I'm that pointed about it, like, you know, it's like very specific. And so I actually think like becoming like fully aware of it, like this is what I want to do and like this is why I want to do it. It's like it like serves you in actually doing that. I'm like super like grateful too that I have like a bunch of random chips on my shoulder, because it was like I just think it like makes my like life fun. Like it seems like a game now. Like I couldn't imagine not having all of these like weird side quests on the map when I open up like my personal OS, you know? Like I'm like super happy. But like people that complain about it, I'm just like, what are you doing? Like you have the best. This is the best. Like you're like gifted all of these like things to potentially go out and like solve or do. And like, yeah, whatever. Emotionally, sometimes it might not be great, but it's like, even if you didn't have these things, like you're going to still have like emotional issues. Like there's no like easy way through life. Right. Like a lot of my like friends that grew up wealthy with like very successful parents, it's like they have their own version of like that, which I do not envy at all.
Yeah, I actually I'm not a psychologist or anything, so take this with a grain of salt, but I do think there's something in us as humans where if we don't have some sort of problem we're chasing, some sort of like chip on our shoulder, whatever that thing is, I think we create problems. I very much feel like I feel fortunate in that way to always feel like I have to be driving towards something from like a, you know, an achievement standpoint, because if that wasn't what I was chasing, I don't know, maybe I don't even know what I'd be doing. I'd be sitting on my couch complaining about something else.
People think I'm crazy for doing this, but there's like a small set of things in the company that I am extremely decisive about and nobody else gets to decide. One of which is, what does our office look like? And it can never look nice. Because the problem is that the second the office looks nice and it looks comfortable and things like that, you think that you're not battling the outside world and competitors and status quo and all of those things, because it's like, oh yeah, like we've made it, like we have plenty of money, and people start infighting. And so like this office, for example, it has like a window pane missing, it's single pane glass, no HVAC, it's cold in the winters, like all sorts of insanity. And people are just like, man, Richard, when are we going to get a nicer office? And I'm like, you don't get it. We're never getting a nicer office.
I wish I could be like that. I'm like a bit of like an aesthetics junkie, where where like if something didn't look nice, I couldn't work, because like I would be like, I want to make that nice. But I wish I could be like, but like there's like I mean, I think I might have like my own version of this. Like right now, like I have like 2 big windows right here, but the blinds are always closed. And like everyone's like, oh, like work with natural light. I'm like, no, like if I can see a sunny day, you know, my life is too good. Like I like close it. I'm like, it's like dark in here, and there's like, it's like my lair, but it needs to be like clean and like designed well. I wish I could have that other level of environment creation that maybe creates more urgency. But for me, like the nice design is like, I almost feel like it's a good scene for whatever I want to do, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, we have, I'll just point it out. We have like folding tables and folding chairs in like the common area, which is like the first thing we purchased, like literally from Costco. And somebody asked me like, hey, can we upgrade the furniture? And yeah, of course I said no.
That's awesome. I wish I was like that. Like we have folding chairs at our like team lunch table. When I decided to get folding chairs, my thing was like, I want to find the coolest folding chairs. So we have these like acrylic folding chairs that are all different colors because I'm like, this is the coolest version of folding chair. And like I probably spent like 15, 20 minutes like researching them, like what's the best folding chair? Like found, and like there was like a level of like gratification that I was like, oh, these are cool folding chairs. Like
I was gonna say, I feel like this episode is just like get into the mind of a SaaS operator, as opposed to actually talking about SaaS. So it feels like future episodes are going to be actually talking about SaaS, but it's like, hey guys, like this is just how we think. Like this is our mindset. This is our mind state. This is what we're trying to do. This is how we try to think about things, which is super interesting. It's just it's just a different set of topics than I guess we had planned for, which in some ways is good, but we'll of course like it'll keep iterating and we'll see how it where we land.
Yeah, I think maybe, I mean, we're coming up on an hour. I think it would be like a good time to maybe we dive in on like a rapid fire of like one of these topics we had, which was, you know, product led versus sales led. So, I mean, like when you're building a software company, it's like, okay, one, you need to build the thing. And then I believe harder, you need to like get people to use the thing. And like, we've never been sales led in any way. Like I would say like our sales touch point across 10,000 customers is like maybe 100 of them have like talked to a salesperson. When you guys were like presented with the problem of we are building a thing and then we need to get people to use it, what was your problem approach in that? For me, it was like it was like from a personal point of view, it was like I hate getting on a sales call with people, and so I'm not going to do that. And like that was just my decision making process. And now, you know, we're building a sales team and doing all that stuff. But how did you guys approach that?
I would actually say we're building all three motions, so it's actually pretty interesting to see how it works. We're building sales led, reseller, which is agency, and then also self serve. And I would say that actually the biggest decision that you need to make when you're trying to decide which one of these three paths to go down is, does the customer need to talk to a salesperson to use the product? So it has to be driven by the customer perspective, not by the company perspective, which is like, is this product either not obvious, not clear, not yet ready enough? Like those are all reasons why the customer would need to talk to a salesperson, right? Or like in enterprise world, it's like, hey, there's just like no way that I'm going to buy something without talking to someone first, because I don't even know like whether this thing will support the constraints of my enterprise. And so like that is how you should make the decision, not like what does the company want to do. Like the company should be irrelevant to the sales, because like the sales motion is basically like how do you go to market, and so it must be dictated by the market. It must not be dictated by the company.
Yeah, and one thing I think that's really interesting there is then your pricing model has to align with that too. So like when you talk about sales, if you have a product that requires sales, you have to price it in such a way that you can actually afford to sell it. Like it's just much more expensive to sell something that requires sales, right? Whereas if you've got something that's self-serve, you can price it differently because you don't necessarily need somebody to go through the process and get on a call. And there's also like a bit of there's a cycle there too, right? Where it's like, if it's more expensive, you also need more sales. The more that you need sales, the more like you have to charge for it. Like and then on the flip side too, you have that with self-serve. It's like, okay, well, the less involvement you need. Like on the no side, we have always been self-serve, but with the option of sales, essentially, if that makes sense. So like most people self-serve, but some set of people will opt to have a sales call. And really that's a demo. It's literally like, hey, does this thing solve what I need? And usually it's 1 or 2 calls with somebody. Sometimes it's more than that, but typically it's 1 or 2 calls, call it 30 to 60 minutes of like time spent with a customer, making sure that this is going to solve their use cases. And then we win that customer. And so that's been historically the approach that we've had. And so what's interesting is in that context, you're actually looking for, how do I make self-serve easier? Because that then reduces the time that I need people involved. It allows for an easier process for those who do self-select, because a lot of them do. And it ultimately results in increased conversion rates for that type of person and all of that. Whereas, and on the sales side, then like you almost go the opposite direction. I feel like if you're really leaning into sales, where it's like, okay, we actually don't care as much about the ease of use for somebody, because in that context, like, we're going to have people support them in that, and we're going to like, it's just a different mindset. So we're kind of, I would say we're actually trying to do both as well. Like, we're really trying to lean more into self-serve and also more into an enterprise sort of approach, because there are brands out there that are like, hey, I just want you to do everything for us. We have a brand that came to us a few months ago, and they said, hey, like, can you guys just do all of this? Like, we'll pay you a premium to manage all of it for us. And we're like, well, we've been thinking about that, so sure, we'll do it. And that's ultimately the route, I think, is it's like, okay, there you got some people who are functionally, it's the same product, but either you do it yourself and you pay us a couple $100 a month, or we do it for you and you pay us a few $1,000s a month. And I think what's also the one thing that I found really interesting too.
We should talk about it separately, but few thousand sounds like too little.
It probably is. And it depends on what you're doing, right? And how much of it you can actually automate as well. The answer on that right now is nothing is automated. But yeah, the other thing that's been interesting too is I would say 80% of our revenue is actually built around a single use case, even though our platform is capable of doing.
That's exactly why you need to charge more. That's exactly why you need to charge more.
Yeah, and then what's interesting though is, like, if you don't charge more and you don't push people to do more, they focus on the single use case, and it's actually not as valuable of a product. So that's been a massive challenge for us. And that's why we are really looking at going the two directions of like, okay, well, for the person who wants one use case, how do we make it as easy as possible for them to do that one thing? For the person who wants a holistic business solution, how do we make it as easy as possible to get that one thing? And ultimately that means us basically supporting you in a lot of that, probably, or at least like structuring the pricing in such a way where you're incentivized to actually use the things that are in our platform. And the irony is, like, that sometimes that means actually like charging more, to your point, to actually like get people to use those things. If I charge you for it, you're actually more likely to use it than if I give it to you for free, which is an interesting dichotomy.
Product adoption, like new feature product adoption amongst the customers, even the ones that love you, I think is one of the hardest things with software. Like, I even know for myself, anecdotally, the moment I signed up for something and then I start using it for something, I've compartmentalized it in my brain so with like concrete barriers that even when products launch things that I need or would be very helpful, it's almost like I've already felt the relief of understanding the tool and using it for a thing, and making the decision to go back through that pain state of recategorizing that product or that company of whatever I use them for, and then learning the new thing. I'm almost like, it's like I push it aside, like, and I'm like, I put like, oh, that'd be really cool one day. But it's like, it's almost a second buying journey, even if they don't need to spend more. So it is very, it's very interesting. We have a new product coming out in April, and like part of me is like, I want to give like some sort of free version of this to everybody, and just like, you can play around with it, and then like it would be great if this many thousands of people can start using it. But there's another part of me that knows it's like, if I don't put this behind some sort of upgrade wall, there isn't going to be any urgency to like get in there and use it. And so it's actually a decision I'm trying to make right now. But yeah, new product adoption amongst the existing software, like I never expected how hard that was going to be.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's almost like you have to force them buying.
I'm going to see you in the next week, Swan. I really got to run. But
yeah,
dude, I'm excited to dig in more. See y'all.
So
sounds good.
Appreciate you, Rashab.
I actually love that. It's a really good point. Like, you almost have to force a new buying pattern there in order for people to actually use it.
I thought you said something really interesting, Jeremiah, about how much of it is automated. None of it. I was thinking, you guys are building software, but isn't a huge amount of this automated? And then that point where it stops being automated and you require like service is the gap in integration between your different products, right? Where the user has to come in and start actually using it as a tool, right? Like, you built the hammer, it's their job to swing it, right? But there are software tools out there, and your tool, Zach's tool, that, a fair amount of it is automated. At the click of a button, it's done, right? So it's interesting that, and I can totally understand why a brand would come to, whether it's stamped, it's Foreplay and the new product, and say, hey, I want this thing to do it all for me, right? Because that's why I'm getting software. so I can solve these problems in a quicker, faster way, right?
Yeah, that is interesting, actually. So cool.
All right, should we wrap it up?
Yep.
Yeah.
The first
It
episode.
was fun, guys.
If anybody made it to the end, thank you. Subscribe or add it to your playlist or do whatever you do with podcasts, and we're going to try to stick to this.
Yep.